Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I am Abe with MysticGenMara.com, a small town mystic from the middle of Idaho. And tonight is the continuing series, Occult and Crochet. And it is going to be on the third and final founder of the Golden Dawn, a metaphysical, mystical, and possibly psychological, depending on how you view some of this stuff, founder of this group, and that would be William Wynn Westcott. Yeah, another William. We're gonna go with Westcott for him because it's just easier trying to differentiate between all the Williams. So, bear with me. I had something typed up on the screen in front of me, but I also was doing further research and I didn't get it all put onto one screen, so I've got paper copies and other. So we'll see how this works out tonight. If you're new to the channel, please hit the subscribe button so you know whenever I go live or drop new videos. If you enjoy this kind of content, please drop a like on it. The chat is live at the moment, so you can chat away if you are interested in that. And, you know, be respectful. That's my big one. And then other than that, if you're watching this on replay, just comment away, let me know what you think. So with that being said, we'll get started into who is this another William. Born in 1848 in, oh good grief, I was supposed to look this up and I didn't. Leamington, Warwickshire, England. This young man was normal, nothing surprising about his youth according to what I was finding, except for one little thing that happened when he was around 8 to 10 years old. This is the 2-year window of when this all happened. He lost both of his parents. Not very uncommon to lose groups of family members. In this time period, medical science wasn't so great right at that point, but to lose both of them before you were 10 years old, that's a lot. And he eventually was adopted and raised by his uncle, and I could not believe this uncle's name. His uncle was Richard Westcott Martin, or Martine, depending on which definition you want to look up, because it's M-A-R-T-Y-N. Interesting spelling. Anyway, Uncle Richard was a surgeon by trade, so this is where we get another doctor, another medical person in the group, because Woodman was a doctor as well. Really, the only one that didn't have a direct medical background was Mathers, but I think he did have some medical studies. He just wasn't full doctor from what I can find. Anyway, Uncle Richard had a fair amount of money, it seems, because he was able to send him to a school called the Queen Elizabeth Grammar School. And from there, he grew up and moved into the study of medicine at the University College in London. It was in his university years that he, where am I at? I've got, like I said, I got notes everywhere, sorry. It was during that time period while he was in school where he first started getting interested in the occult, ceremonial magic, and also joined one of the first Freemason lodges that he was involved in. Over the years, it looks like he was involved with specifically Freemason and Freemason associated lodges, about 9 different groups. Over the time, though, he really got dedicated to a minimum, like 2 specific groups, and then also branched out into other metaphysical groups. So it was during his college years is when he first joined one of the Freemasons. And it was also during that time, and this is kind of a little side note in history, this is when he married his wife Elizabeth Burnett and started having children. Sources are differing, as they usually do at this stuff. One source, and I will specify that, one source said 5 children. Multiple other sources said 6. It was 5 or 6 kids him and his wife had. So, but that only, everything with that will come clear a little bit later because I'm going to wrap that up. But just for where we are at in our time frame, that's where it was. So it was sometime in the 1871-ish is when he joined his first Freemason lodge. And over that time, while he was in school, it was about 9 years, he joined several other groups within the lodge and outside the lodge as well, associated to the Freemasons. Westcott became certified as a physician also around 1871. So the graduation and the joining of the groups is kind of blurred from what I was finding, because some people say he joined while he was in school but don't say where, but then others said that he joined the year he graduated. He joined the Freemasons in or around college. And when he graduated, he also accepted a position as a partner with his uncle in his uncle's private surgical practice. What's interesting, though, is while he was in his first lodge, Freemason lodge, in about 3 years or so, he had worked his way up to the title of master of his lodge, and this was around the age of 26 years old. School, Freemasons, that kind of build of growth, graduating school and ending up at master of a lodge within a very short window of time, that's a lot, just in general. Eventually, he became the master in the Qatar Coronati Lodge, and I don't know much about that lodge. It was kind of mentioned in passing. It was not the original lodge he joined in 71, though. Over to the time, he eventually moved to the area of Hendon. Again, how you say it, it depends on who you listen to. And that was around 1879. It was here that he started to research, and the Kabbalah was when he moved to Hendon, but the research caught his attention, according to his history, around 1880, which is kind of fascinating to realize that he dedicated so much of his time to research, but also kept to that detailed notes. Pretty cool. It was also around the time that he was in this 1880 period that he joined the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia Lodge. And where have we heard of the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia before? If you remember the name, you remember who else has been a member. This was the lodge that Woodman was the chief, and S.L. Mathers was a member therein. He was basically the third one to join, from what I can see. Woodman had been in there for years because he was the master of this lodge. This was it was actually a Freemason lodge, but it was dedicated, from what I can find, to exclusively metaphysical studies, occult, magic, etc. It was the exceptional inner sanctum. We're not talking like Scottish Free Rite Masonry. We're talking the more common Masons. This was basically the metaphysical, the occult, the magical branch of that group. So it kind of fit into where he was at. He'd already passed through all the levels on the everyday lodge, and now he's into basically the secret lodge. What's interesting is around the same time that he joined this lodge, and I find this interesting just because the timing is interesting. You join, start studying about magic, and you get appointed to be deputy coroner in 1881, and later was appointed to be the primary coroner for Northeast London. Those are big positions. Those are very public positions. Being in the Freemasons was a badge of honor. Being in some of the other groups he was associated with at the time wasn't the greatest, so there was big hush-hush going on there. And what I found interesting is, over the course of different studies that I've done in different people, some coming up later, they all seem to have a similar attraction to working somehow with bodies or with death, because he became the coroner after being a surgeon. So something mystical there, maybe just me, whatever. But again, that's when he had to be really quiet about his occult practices. And one of the comments that I saw in one article, and it kind of made me giggle a little bit, was he had to be closeted with his occult practices. And it's like, really? It wasn't like he was going out doing, other things. It was the occult. But then put yourself in that time period. You had a very small group of primary churches, a few random outliers. And the occult and mysticism was just starting to really get moving. For him being in a public position, because coroners even today are fairly high up in the spectrum of life. Most people don't realize here in America, the only person who can arrest a sheriff is the coroner, and they're both elected officials. So that's a very important position. And so for him, he had to keep a lot of his less mainstream practices hidden away, because if he didn't, it could end very badly, and I mean very badly for him in that time. Not so much jail, although that's possible, but full ostracization, getting kicked out of the town, losing social status, losing a lot of his funding. The banks could have done some things to him. So this was something he had to be very careful with, and he was pretty good about it for a lot of years, to be brutally honest with you. Like I said, I got notes in two different places, so I'm having to check. It was said, I have a really bad case of the yawns tonight, and I don't know what my problem is. It was said that in 1882 was when Westcott was introduced to Mathers. And even though the friendship between these two, from a few different sources I've looked at, they weren't the best of friends. They tolerated each other because one had access to vast amounts of knowledge, Westcott, and the other had a way of turning that knowledge into practical, functional, ritual work. That would be Mathers. Woodman was the one who, like I said before, was able to balance these two headstrong young men, because Mathers and Westcott were only a few years apart, whereas Woodman was 20 years, both of their seniors. So he was kind of the father figure that kept the two of them at peace. So it's kind of interesting when you look at it from that point. The other thing that I put a note in my papers because I was going through it, and I'm like, why was he had to be so secretive about his metaphysical? I knew there was the public, shaming and stuff like that, but there was also, and this still's a little bit true today, not to the level that they used to think, but back in the day, coming through the Dark Ages up through about the mid-1800s, you had this belief that people who did magic worked with corpses kind of exclusively, worked very, very black, dark, evil magic. And when you would do that, it was called necromancy, not what you'd see today in a lot of movies of raise the zombie from the grave. That's part of it, but there's more. It's corpse bothering, reading divination through someone who's died intestines, a disturbing thing, don't look into it. And something along those lines. So him in the coroner's position, it wasn't something you wanted to have get out in public, so he had to keep that really quiet. Okay, so in 1887 he somehow, and this, we're going to go through a little bit of legend here, and then we're going to discuss some of the criticisms of it. According to Westcott, in 87 he somehow came across some ancient or older manuscripts written in a cipher, a code. He deciphered this text and found within all of this paperwork there was a small parchment with the name Fräulein Sprengel, okay, who was a Rosicrucian adept in Germany. Okay, so far so good. Also within this manuscript were fragments of magical rituals that he couldn't quite grasp the meaning of. He knew what it was, just not the purpose. In comes S.L. Mathers. Westcott was versed in ceremonial arts, but it was the fellow SIRA member, Society, etc., and occultist Mathers who brought these rituals to life. Westcott would pull phrases, maybe some symbols, and not fully understand what it meant. Mathers had a unique ability, and I talked about that when I talked about him a little bit, that he was able to take bits and pieces of this manuscript that may or may not have been gibberish and actually create functional, and I do mean functional, magical rituals from it. What they were doing was pretty impressive even by today's standards. Mind you, during this time, neither one of these two had hit 30 yet. So just something to think about. These are young men and they're figuring this out, and it's functional and it's working. Alright, so during all of this magic and discovery, Westcott began, again we're still in Westcott's version of things, writing to Fraulein Sprengel, and she gave him the go-ahead to start a branch of her society, the one that she was an adept in, and that was called Die Golden Dämmerung. And I may have totally butchered that. I tried to write it down. That's what we got. Westcott, along with Woodman and Mathers, founded the very first official Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn in 1988. The Golden Dawn is part of what was brought in here, but they were talking about the Hermetic Order, and Hermeticism is something a little bit more intense than just the standard concept of Golden Dawn. But that's where we are. That's where we're at. And it was from Fraulein Sprengel that Westcott took his title, Frater. I had this somewhere else. Frater Sapir Odd, which is the father who dares to be wise, or the father who dares to know. Seriously, guys, come on. Anyway, they all three took names under the title of Father, Frater. And an interesting pattern that is still going on today in Golden Dawn branch lodges, and some of the reconstructed Rosicrucian lodges are doing this as well. And they take names with frater or soror, which is sister, based on Latin or Greek phrases. For example, frater sapere ad is a Greek phrase that means either the father who dares to be wise or the father who dares to know. They all had different titles. There's actually authors today who write under their pseudonyms of frater, like UD, or there's a couple other ones out there now. I can't remember now. I didn't write them down. This is kind of just going off on that. People like Aleister Crowley took on multiple different fraters. He stuck with one primary one in his writings, but over the years he had a couple of different titles. Of course he would. But that was kind of where that was going, was they were bringing in this older pattern of bringing in Latin names with their titles. And it was from... So that's what Westcott said. But it's not 100% true, at least according to modern day scholars. There has arisen some controversy surrounding primarily Westcott's version of this founding. There is a belief that Fraulein Sprengel wasn't even a real person, that he had actually forged some documents to look like that he was writing to somebody else. There is very little, if any, justified proof of that particular order in Germany at that time. There's been some other ones pop up since, but not during that period of time. So there's that. The speculation goes that Westcott wanted legitimacy for his newly formed newly planned, because they hadn't formed it yet, Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn Lodge, and having it connected to an older, very secret society was a way to bring that legitimacy to them. There are scholars within the lodge today in the main Hermetic Order that suggest that the letters have been faked just by going over them, handwriting analysis, things like that. And the original manuscripts may have never existed. There is a belief that some of the rituals that he helped adjust and tweak with Mathers were from the cipher manuscripts, which were part of the society, Rosicrucian in England, So there's a possibility that he may have stole some of their stuff. Although from looking through some of their talking about Westcott, they don't feel that it was a bad thing what he did. He basically revamped some of their older workings and made them a little bit more clean cut, is kind of the comments. What's interesting is that particular society wasn't that old. It was only, I think, 10 years old or something like that, maybe a little bit longer. I couldn't find an exact start date for it, but it wasn't that old when Westcott and Woodman were involved. So it goes to, did he steal someone else's rituals, or did he just clean up some messy rituals? So, with that, the magical rituals and practices that sprang forth from Mathers and Westcott's work are very viable and very workable if you have the basics down. That's the trick, is they have, it's ceremonial mysticism, ceremonial magic. It's not as simple as it is in, and I use that term loosely, it's not as simple within like Wicca, where you can do a lot of things without tools. They had very detailed instructions for what your public temple, where you did group stuff, where your personal temple, the robes, the tools, the wands, the censers, this was all very, very detailed. And I have the book on the Golden Dawn that was written later on, and I'm only like halfway through, maybe a little bit further, just reading it. The amount of detail, the amount of information that was saved thanks to one person, which I'm going to talk about later, which was Israel Regardie, is absolutely amazing. These three men literally developed something that, for all intents and purposes, could last till the end of time. There were some issues that came along later, but that was after most of them were not involved anymore. But anyway, and I do plan on going over and kind of giving a basic outline of what the Golden Dawn really is, because it's interesting, and the controversies that have popped up recently about it, well, recently in the last 20 years, 50 years maybe, are kind of entertaining. Most of it is not true if you know the source material, but it's still entertaining. So, going along with controversies, Westcott retired from the Golden Dawn in 1897. And people think that it may have been because he was given an ultimatum by his higher-ups within the coroner's office that the Golden Dawn being public, most people knew of it. They didn't know who was all involved. But at one point, his name became tied to that lodge. And during this time period, it was a magic lodge, and they do weird things in there. And, it was not popular amongst the common everyday person. But he did end up retiring, and it was from the lodge in 1897, and it was under a shadow of controversy. I haven't found specifics, but it's alluded to that he may have left a pamphlet, or someone left a pamphlet from one of the lodges, the Golden Dawn lodges, and it had his name on it, and somehow got back to his higher ups, and they were like, no, ditch that or you don't have a job. So he stepped away from the lodge, which I don't know how you could do that. I mean, when you really think about it, you've put this much time, this much effort, this much of your life into building something like a lodge like this, and by this point it had grown fairly large. It was only a few years, but it was enough to get a good foot underneath it, and to be able to walk away from that with really, from what I could find, without even looking back. Like, he walked away and he was done. It's like, how can you do that? That's your baby and you're just walking away from it. But whatever. And as I said in the Woodman video, Westcott had assumed the leadership of the Supreme Magus in the SIRA after Woodman's passing in 1891. So he stepped away from one thing, but he still was involved in the occult in a very big way, just through the Freemasons, not through his own work. Westcott kept writing throughout the 1890s. He wrote on occult topics such as the Kabbalah, translated various works, including works by Eliphas Levi, which I'll go over him. Very interesting character, to say the least. But we're not talking about him today. Anyway, towards the last of his life, Westcott moved to Durban in South Africa, but he moved back and forth, visiting back in London, and that's when his wife would eventually have an injury and pass away, and then he would return to South Africa. It was, to me, and this is a personal opinion because I have a hard time with this group, he joined and eventually became the vice president to two different Theosophical Society lodges when he was in South Africa. Yeah, I have a hard time with that one because Theosophy has no place in a Western occult practice. Its beliefs are a weird hodgepodge of Marxism and severely unique Eastern practices. And when I say severely unique, I'm talking like they selected very specific ones, ignored a whole list of others to make this really weird, to me it's weird, practice of, I completely just lost the word I was looking for, and I even have it written down, and I'm line through it. Anyway, it's this idea of giving away everything that you own, everything that you have, to live in abject, basically poverty, and that this is some form of virtue. But it makes no sense because you don't just give it away, you also give it back to the lodge, so you're getting into that questionable land. And the lady who founded it, and I will go over her, that should get me some hate mail. Not the greatest of people. To me, I just don't have a lot of respect. And before anyone comes after me, yes, I have read a couple of her books. I have looked into the lodges. That's my opinion based on what I have found. Altruism, that's the word I was looking for. They have a very strong belief in altruistic, but they take it to such an extreme that to me it's unhealthy, and it, like I said, it kind of bugs me, and I don't know his thought patterns as to why he joined those lodges, but he did eventually join two Theosophical Society lodges. And from what I could find, because there's some blur lines here again, Westcott did pass away in June of 1925, and from what it appears, he passed away in South Africa. He lived a lot in his 70-plus years on this planet, I have to say. He was a coroner, which is huge. He was a mason, and a master mason by the age of 26. That just blows me away. He was a physician, fully licensed and certified in Europe, or England, and, of course, an occultist, but he really never said no to any lodge. He joined approximately, 20-some lodges over his life, including creating his own magical lodge, which is interesting because it's one of the only surviving lodges from that time. Many groups popped up during the 1850s to the 1940s. The Golden Dawn had a unique, how they developed it, had a unique staying power. The problem was the people in charge. Woodman passed away. Westcott was forced to retire. Mathers, for his greatness in some things, was not a leader, and so it ended up getting corrupted. And from that, you ended up having these weird branches. Again, I'll talk about that later. But the main heart of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, the group these three men founded, these three men right here, the group that they founded, is still alive and still going in a form. I won't say it's the greatest of forms, but it's still there. There's a few of the branched out lodges are still running around. Some of them are very questionable just by their practices. They've got books written. I probably won't recommend those because I've read a few of them, and it's like, seriously, it's like they want to have a grasp of it and don't quite grasp what was happening. And that could be just experience from them. They had different experiences than I have. But these three men coming together to build something that has lasted for more than 100 years is impressive. The works and the rituals, where there are parts of it that's a little bit Masonic, there's parts of it that's very Kabbalah based, but they built this out of all these random bits and pieces into this functioning, working society, and it's pretty impressive, at least to me. So we will do a little wrap up here, and here is what Westcott looked like. This is when he's in his SIRA regalia, and sadness and death followed Westcott, unfortunately. He lost his parents when he was young. Before the age of 10, both of his parents had passed. He married Elizabeth Burnett, and they had 6 or 5 kids, depending on where you find it. 4 of them died before he even passed away. 2 of them when they were very young. One was a suicide, or no, one was very young, one was a suicide. One died of a festering wound. The other became bedridden from a mysterious illness and passed away. And it is said that his wife fell from a window, injuring herself, first like a 1-story up, so it wasn't that high. But however she fell, it damaged her severely. They didn't say specifically what happened, and she passed away shortly thereafter. Nothing is said about the remaining single or 2 children, again, depending on sources, other that they lived past their father. And then about a year is what it looked like from when she passed away. Then Westcott himself passed away as well. So again, we have a very interesting, a very eccentric, you could say, gentleman, and a lot like Mathers and a lot like Woodman, had a great deal to offer, pushed further than a lot of people did. To me, the part that is so fascinating is, and when I get to Crowley, I'll go over this type of thing again because it just blows my mind, but Westcott was able to achieve master of a temple, a Freemason lodge, in a very short period of time, about 3 years. He was 26 when he took that position. By the age of 30, Westcott and Mathers, who were around that same time, and Woodman, who was around 50-ish, were developing their own their own lodge, their own metaphysical occult lodge. They put it together from maybe questionable sources, but they still put it together and they made it into something functional. Just like I said in Woodman's video, Westcott was able to research and find, quote unquote, these documents and bring them forward, and then Mathers was able to put them into a functioning form, and Woodman was there to kind of keep the peace between these two hotheads, because they were both extremely intelligent in their own right. They weren't always probably the best of friends, we'll just say that. But they did create something, these 3 men. These 3 men who had to keep it secret. These 3 men who started off not too bad off, ended up not being, when they passed, not so great, but you know. And they had some interesting years along the way. And when I go over a little bit more of the Golden Dawn later, you'll understand why I say this was not a small feat. This was massive. And these 3 men built this. There's not many people today who could do that. I couldn't probably pick 3 people out of a crowd that could do what these 3 men did. And while they were doing it, this is the part that just is so fascinating to me. They had families, they had full-time jobs, and they had other lodges and societies they were involved in. Like, that's a lot of work when you put that down on paper. Most of us can barely keep up with 2 jobs in a household, let alone throw in societies on top of that. But some other things that I thought were interesting about Westcott: he was a publisher of a couple of different college papers, like periodicals, and during his time working there, he wrote very prolifically, there we go, in the medical community for his time. And once he became the head of SIRA, he was able to extend the reach of that society building 16 more lodges internationally, as I spoke with Woodman's video. What I thought was interesting is he built those 16 other lodges, or established them. 9 of them are still open from what I could find. That's a pretty good track record. He knew where he was planting the seeds of that knowledge, and it's kept growing, so that's pretty interesting. Anyway, I've babbled on here long enough, so with that, I will let you guys go. Please drop a like on the video, subscribe if you're new here, comment, let me know what you think of this gentleman, if you've worked any of the rituals or read any of his work. I did link some of his translations and his writings down below, just a couple. There's a lot out there, but this is kind of a good starting point if you're wanting to get into some of the occult literature that he wrote. So that being said, I will let you guys go. Have a great rest of your evening, and I will see you in a future video.